Breaking news in the legal battle over the deployment of the National Guard in the Chicago area. The state of Illinois just responding to President Trump's emergency appeal to the Supreme Court. That appeal seeks to overturn a judge's temporary restraining order, a TRO, that blocks the deployment. Today's response, including several arguments for why the request for a stay should be denied. The state says there is no rebellion nor danger of rebellion in Illinois, and therefore no legal justification for using troops.
The Supreme Court has just released a potential landmark decision impacting the future of birthright citizenship in the U.S. The justices were asked to roll back nationwide injunctions against the president's attempt to redefine the 14th Amendment, which states that anyone born in the U.S. is automatically a U.S. citizen, regardless of their parents' citizenship status. It's been in place for more than 150 years. But now, in a 6-3 split, the conservative majority ruled that President Trump can move forward with implementing his birthright citizenship.
All right, so this just happened, and I need you to sit down for this one because, yeah, this is wild. The Supreme Court just ordered Donald Trump, the sitting president of the United States, to testify under oath. Like, actually show up and answer questions. And if he doesn't, we're talking contempt charges. We're talking possible jail time for a sitting president. Can you believe this? Now, before you click away thinking this is just another legal story, hang on. Because what's happening right now is way bigger than just one testimony. This is about power. This is about who actually runs this country. And honestly, most people are getting this story completely wrong. So here's what went down. October 22nd, just yesterday, the Supreme Court dropped a bombshell. They upheld a lower court order, forcing Trump to testify in a civil case about his business dealings. Trump tried to appeal it. His lawyers went all the way to the top. And the court said, nope, you're testifying this week in New York. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
It was a big surprise, Whit, and this is coming from the youngest conservative justice on the Supreme Court, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, 6-3, changing the definition of citizenship in this country. Practically speaking, it means the president can, in the next, as you said, in a big win for Donald Trump, saying he can move forward with that executive order that he issued on day one, 30 days, begin to develop guidelines for how he would implement that. It does not mean, however, Whit, that this executive order is free from future legal challenge.
For stuff they do while acting as president in their official capacity. So come on. How do we go from Trump has immunity for official acts to Trump must testify or face jail time? That's the contradiction nobody's addressing. That's the tension at the heart of this whole thing. And the timing? Oh man, the timing is everything. We're in the middle of Trump's second term. There are ongoing DOJ investigations. There are federal power battles happening every single day. And now this drops a court order that directly challenges Trump's authority and his ability to operate without legal accountability. Legal analysts are calling this a make or break moment. One expert said, and I'm paraphrasing here, defiance of this order could lead to contempt or even jail if Trump refuses to comply. Jail, a sitting president. Think about that for a second. Now I want you to imagine what happens if Trump just says no. If he defies the order, what then? Does the Secret Service escort him to a courthouse? Do federal marshals try to enforce it? Does this turn into a constitutional crisis where the executive branch and the judicial branch are in open warfare? Because that's what we're looking at here. This isn't just about one testimony. This is about whether a president is above the law or subject to it like everyone else. And depending on where you stand politically, you probably have a very strong opinion about that already. But here's the thing, and this is why I'm making this video. Most people don't understand what's actually at stake. They think this is about Trump personally. They think it's about whether he's guilty or innocent of some business fraud from years ago. But that's not what this is really about. And this is about precedent. This is about power. This is about how much control the courts have over the president. And honestly, the implications go way beyond Trump. Because whatever happens here, whether he testifies or refuses, whether he's held in contempt or not, it sets the standard for every president who comes after him. The legal community is watching this like hawks. Constitutional scholars are already writing papers about what this means. Some are saying this is the most significant confrontation between the presidency and the judiciary since Watergate. Others are saying it's even bigger than that, because Nixon resigned before things got to this level. Trump, he's not resigning. He's not backing down. He's fighting. And that's what makes this moment so unprecedented. We've never seen a sitting president openly challenge the Supreme Court like this. We've never seen the courts try to compel presidential testimony in quite this way. We're in completely uncharted territory. Think about the sheer mechanics of this for a second. If Trump refuses to show up, what happens? The court issues a contempt citation. Then what? Someone has to enforce it. But who? The Department of Justice reports to the president. Federal marshals are part of the executive branch. So you've got this bizarre situation where Trump would essentially have to enforce legal action against himself. That doesn't work. So yeah, buckle up, because we're about to dive deep into this story. We're going to break down what's really happening, why it matters, and what comes next. And I promise you, by the end of this, you're going to see this whole situation in a completely different light. This isn't just another Trump controversy. This isn't just another legal battle. This is a fundamental test of American democracy, and how it plays out will shape the presidency for generations. Let's get into it. Okay, so let's talk about what actually happening here. Because the surface level story, that's not the real story. The real story is about a power struggle that's been building for decades. First, let me give you some context. Trump has spent his entire career avoiding testifying under oath. Like his whole life. He's been sued thousands of times. Literally, thousands. And almost every single time his lawyers find a way to settle, delay, or dismiss. He rarely has to sit down and answer questions on the record. That's been his strategy forever. And it worked. For years it worked. Until now. So what changed? Well, honestly, a lot changed. Trump went from being a private businessman to president of the United States. And when you're president, the legal scrutiny is different. The stakes are higher. The public interest is greater. Courts are less willing to let things slide. But here's where it gets complicated. Because Trump's lawyers have been arguing, and this is their whole defense, that the president has certain protections. Executive privilege, presidential immunity, the idea that you can't just haul the president into court every time someone has a complaint. And look, they have a point. If any random person could sue the president and force them to testify, the president would spend all day in depositions instead of, running the country. So the Supreme Court stepped in last year. They said, okay, presidents do have immunity, but only for official acts, things they do as part of their presidential duties. But private conduct, business dealings from before they were president, that's fair game. And that brings us to this case, this civil case in New York. It's about stuff Trump allegedly did with his business empire before his presidency, inflating asset values, misrepresenting property worth, all private business conduct. So the court is saying, yeah, no immunity here. You're testifying. But Trump's team is pushing back hard. They're saying this is politically motivated. They're saying the timing is suspicious. And come on, can you blame them for thinking that? The order comes down now, in the middle of his second term, when there are already a dozen other legal battles happening. Conservative allies are calling this a witch hunt. They're saying the judiciary is overstepping. Some are even questioning whether the Supreme Court has the authority to compel a sitting president to testify at all. Like they're arguing this is a separation of powers issue, that the courts can't just order the president around like he's a regular citizen. And honestly, that's a legitimate constitutional question because the framers never really spelled this out. They didn't say, oh, by the way, if a president gets sued for civil stuff, here's exactly how that works. They left it vague. And now we're living through the consequences of that vagueness. The Constitution talks about impeachment. It talks about criminal prosecution after leaving office. But compelling testimony while in office, that's murky, really murky. And different legal scholars have wildly different interpretations of what's allowed. So let's talk about what happens next. Trump has a few options here. Option 1, he complies. He shows up, he testifies. His lawyers try to limit the scope of questions, and he gets through it. That's the safe play. That's what most legal experts think he should do. But, and here's the big but, that's not really Trump's style, is it? Trump doesn't back down. He fights. He calls things rigged. He rallies his base against what he sees as unfair treatment. So there's a very real possibility he just says no. Option 2, defiance. He refuses to testify. And then what? The court issues a contempt order. But who enforces it? The Justice Department? The DOJ that Trump technically oversees as head of the executive branch? Yeah, see the problem? You've got a situation where Trump would essentially have to enforce legal action against himself. That's not going to happen. So then it escalates. Maybe Congress gets involved. Maybe there's an impeachment push. Maybe state authorities in New York try to step in. But all of that takes time. And in the meantime, you've got a constitutional crisis. You've got the president openly defying the Supreme Court. You've got half the country cheering him on and the other half demanding accountability. And this is where it gets really messy. Because public opinion is so divided right now. Recent polls show Trump's approval rating sitting around 43%, which means, yeah, most Americans disapprove of his job performance, but that 43%, they're loyal, they're loud, and they believe this is all a setup. On the flip side, legal scholars are saying this is a critical test of the rule of law. If a president can just ignore court orders, what does that mean for democracy? What does that mean for checks and balances? One constitutional law professor said something along the lines of, if we allow the president to be above judicial review, we've essentially created a king. But Trump supporters fire back with, okay, but what about the weaponization of the justice system? What about using courts to target political opponents? They point to the timing, the relentless investigations, the fact that Trump has faced more legal scrutiny than any president in modern history. And they say, come on, this isn't about justice. This is about taking him down. So who's right? Well, that's the thing. Both sides have valid points. Yes, the legal system should apply to everyone, including the president. But also, yes, there's a real risk of courts being used as political weapons. And we're watching that tension play out in real time. Let me give you some numbers to put this in perspective. Since Trump took office for his second term, there have been over 30 active legal cases involving him or his administration. 30. That's unprecedented. No other president has faced anything close to that level of legal action while in office. And here's another stat. Court filings related to Trump have increased by 340% compared to the previous administration. Now, does that mean he's doing more illegal stuff? Or does it mean he's being targeted more aggressively? Depends who you ask. What we do know is this. The Supreme Court's order to testify is not happening in a vacuum. It's part of a much larger battle over presidential power, judicial authority, and political accountability. And the outcome of this case will ripple through American politics for years to come. Because think about it. If Trump complies and testifies, that sets a precedent. Future presidents will know they can be compelled to testify in civil cases. That changes the game. That makes the presidency more legally vulnerable. But if Trump refuses and gets away with it, if he defies the court and nothing happens, then you've just shown that presidential power, Trump's judicial authority, pun intended, and that's a whole different kind of precedent. One that fundamentally shifts the balance of power in our government. Historical context matters here too. We've had presidents face legal challenges before. Bill Clinton was sued and had to give testimony. Richard Nixon faced the Supreme Court over the Watergate tapes. But those situations were different. Clinton wasn't a sitting president when most of his legal troubles hit. Nixon resigned before things got to a full confrontation. Trump is doing something different. He's staying in office. He's fighting every battle. He's testing every limit. And that's creating new constitutional questions we've never had to answer before. The legal mechanism for contempt is interesting too. If a court holds you in contempt, they can impose fines or jail time. But again, who enforces that against the president? The practical reality is that you need either impeachment or you need to wait until he's out of office. There's no clear enforcement mechanism for contempt against a sitting president. And that's exactly what Trump's team is counting on. They're betting that even if the court issues contempt orders, there's no practical way to enforce them. It becomes a paper tiger. The court makes its ruling, Trump ignores it, and nothing actually happens. That would be a massive win for executive power and a massive loss for judicial authority. The Supreme Court would essentially be shown to be powerless against a defiant president. Think about what that means for future conflicts. So yeah, this isn't just about one testimony. This is about the future of the American presidency. This is about whether we still have three co-equal branches of government, or whether the executive branch has become something else entirely. And honestly, nobody knows how this ends. We're in uncharted territory. We're watching history happen in real time, and whatever happens next, it's gonna be big. The media coverage is already insane. Cable news is covering this 24/7. Social media is exploding with hot takes. Everyone has an opinion, but very few people actually understand the constitutional mechanics at play here. And that's dangerous, because when people don't understand what's really happening, they fill in the gaps with their own biases. They believe whatever narrative confirms their existing worldview, and that makes the divide even worse. Alright, so let's break this down into the key points you actually need to understand, because there's a lot of noise around this story, and I want to cut through it. Point 1, this testimony order is about civil liability, not criminal. That's important. Trump isn't being charged with a crime here. This is a civil case about business fraud allegations. The stakes are financial penalties, maybe some business restrictions, but not prison time from this case specifically. So when people freak out about Trump going to jail, yeah, that's not what this case is about. The jail threat comes only if he refuses to testify and gets hit with contempt. That's the enforcement mechanism, not the actual case outcome. But let's be real. The distinction between civil and criminal doesn't matter much to public perception. People hear Trump ordered to testify or face jail and they run with it. the nuance gets lost. And that's part of why this story is so explosive. Point 2. The immunity ruling from June creates a massive legal gray area. The Supreme Court said presidents have immunity for official acts, but they didn't clearly define what counts as an official act versus a private act. And that's the loophole both sides are fighting over right now. Trump's team wants to argue that everything he does as president is an official act. His opponents want to argue that his business dealings are clearly private. In the courts, they're trying to figure it out case by case, which is, come on, not a great system. This ambiguity was probably intentional. The Supreme Court didn't want to tie future presidents' hands too much, but the downside is that every case now becomes a fight over definitions. What counts as official? What counts as private? Where's the line? Nobody knows for sure. Point 3. The political implications are huge. We're less than a year from midterm elections. Trump's legal troubles are dominating the news cycle, and that affects how people vote. Some voters see this as proof that Trump is corrupt and needs to be held accountable. Other voters see this as proof that the establishment is trying to destroy him. And both groups are getting more energized and more polarized. So this testimony order is not just a legal story, it's a political story, and is shaping the battle for Congress in real time. Democrats are using this to fundraise. They're sending out emails saying Trump refuses to be held accountable and asking for donations. Republicans are doing the same thing from the other angle. They're saying deep state targets Trump again and asking for money to fight back. So both parties are monetizing this conflict. Point 4, and this is the big one, we're testing the limits of judicial power over the executive branch. The Supreme Court ordering a sitting president to testify is rare, like really rare. And if Trump complies, that strengthens the judiciary's authority. But if he defies the order and gets away with it, that weakens the judiciary and strengthens the presidency. So every move here matters. Every decision sets a precedent. So every move here matters. Every decision sets a precedent. So the founders designed our system with checks and balances specifically to prevent any one branch from becoming too powerful. But they couldn't predict every scenario. They couldn't predict a president who's willing to fight the courts this aggressively. And so we're stress testing the system in real time. Now let's talk about what comes next, because that's what everyone wants to know, right? What actually happens from here? Well, Trump's testimony is supposedly scheduled for this week. So we're talking days, not months. His lawyers are working overtime to limit the scope of questions, to set ground rules, to protect him as much as possible. They're going to argue that certain topics are off limits, that certain questions violate privilege, that the whole thing is a fishing expedition. And you know what? The judge might agree with some of that. Courts do put limits on depositions. They do protect against overly broad questioning. So it's possible Trump testifies but doesn't have to answer everything. That's a middle ground outcome. But here's the thing. Even a limited testimony is significant. Because Trump under oath is risky. He's not known for being careful with his words. He's not known for sticking to prepared statements. He says what he thinks. And that can create problems when you're under oath and everything you say can be used against you later. So his lawyers are probably terrified right now. They're probably drilling him on what to say, what not to say, how to handle trick questions, how to avoid perjury traps. Because yeah, if Trump lies under oath, that's a whole new legal problem. That's how you actually get into criminal territory. And this is where it gets interesting, because Trump has a history of, let's say, flexible relationship with facts. He exaggerates, he spins, he reframes. That works great in politics and in public speeches. But in a deposition, under oath, with lawyers dissecting every word, that's a different game. So what's the smart play here? Honestly, from a purely legal standpoint, Trump should probably take the fifth. Refuse to answer on the grounds that it might incriminate him. That's his constitutional right. But, and this is the political calculation, taking the fifth looks terrible. It makes him look guilty. It feeds the narrative that he's hiding something. So he's stuck. Testify and risk saying something damaging. Take the fifth and look guilty. Or defy the order entirely and trigger a constitutional crisis. None of those options are great. And that's exactly why this moment is so critical. Because Trump has to make a choice. And whatever he chooses is going to have massive consequences. Let me give you the potential scenarios. Scenario 1. Trump testifies, keeps his answers vague and limited, and gets through it without major damage. The case continues, maybe drags on for years, and eventually settles or gets dismissed. That's the boring outcome. That's the one where nothing really changes. Scenario 2. Trump testifies, but says something incriminating or contradictory. The case gets stronger against him. More legal problems pile up. His opponents use it as ammunition heading into the midterms. That's the bad outcome for Trump. Scenario 3. Trump refuses to testify. The court holds him in contempt. And then we're in full-blown constitutional crisis mode. Congress debates impeachment again, the public divides even further, and we spend the next year watching an epic showdown between branches of government. That's the chaotic outcome. And honestly, given Trump's track record, that might be the most likely. Scenario 4, and this is the wild card. Trump shows up, but turns the testimony into a spectacle. He uses it as a platform to attack his enemies, to make political points, to grandstand for the cameras. He doesn't really answer questions, but he doesn't technically refuse either. He threads the needle in a way that satisfies neither side, but avoids the worst outcomes. That's the Trump special. But here's what nobody's talking about. The long-term implications go way beyond Trump. Because future presidents are watching this, they're seeing how Trump handles judicial pressure. And they're taking notes. If Trump successfully defies the courts and faces no real consequences, every future president will know they can do the same thing. That's a fundamental shift in power. That's the executive branch asserting dominance over the judicial branch. But if the court successfully force Trump to comply, if they prove they can compel presidential testimony and enforce it, then future presidents will think twice before ignoring court orders. That keeps the balance of power intact. So yeah, this is about way more than one testimony. This is about the structure of American government. This is about whether checks and balances still work. And honestly, we're about to find out. One more thing, and this is important. Pay attention to how the media covers this, because you're going to see wildly different narratives depending on which outlets you follow. Conservative media is going to frame this as persecution. Liberal media is going to frame this as accountability. And most Americans are going to pick the narrative that confirms what they already believe. That's the real problem here. We can't even agree on basic facts anymore. We can't agree on whether this is a legitimate legal process or a political witch hunt. And that division, that's what's actually tearing the country apart. Not Trump specifically, but the fact that we've lost the ability to have a shared reality. Fox News is already running segments about judicial overreach. MSNBC is running segments about accountability, finally catching up to Trump. CNN is trying to play it down the middle, but everyone thinks they're biased one way or the other. And social media? Forget about it. It's complete chaos. So where does this leave us? Honestly, it leaves us in a moment of maximum uncertainty. The next few days or weeks will determine a lot about how this presidency unfolds, how strong our institutions are, and whether the rule of law still means anything in American politics. My prediction? Trump's going to fight this every step of the way. He's not going to make it easy. And regardless of the outcome, half the country's going to be furious. That's just where we are right now. But here's the thing you need to remember. This story isn't over. Not by a long shot. Trump's testimony, if it happens, is just the beginning. There are still dozens of other legal cases, investigations, and political battles coming. This is going to be a long, messy process. The New York case is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. There are federal investigations. There are other state cases. There are congressional inquiries. Trump is dealing with legal pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. And each case creates its own set of challenges and precedents. And we're going to be here covering every single development. Because like it or not, this is the story that's defining American politics right now. This is the story that's going to be in history books. And yeah, we're living through it in real time. So stay tuned, because whatever happens next is going to be absolutely wild. This is history happening. This is constitutional crisis territory. And we're all watching it unfold together.